is Cool Cars, Interesting People. You know, I found out on short notice that my former co-worker, Cheryl Oates, used to work at Global TV and went on to be kind of the right-hand gal of Premier Rachel Notley. She is leaving this province and moving to Kyrgyzstan for an amazing new journey. So we had the chance to talk with her, and she's inside. So I thought we should go find out this story. Come on in. Cheryl? Kofferstagen Flaggenblöges?
Oh, I'm good. How are you?
You do. Cheryl Oates, welcome back to Lethbridge.
Oh, thank
to
you.
Jabba the Hutt. Hey, Brian. Hey, Mark. Okay. And when we were talking, this is like going back to bring your child to work day. You and our cameraman Chris and your sister Tammy is right over there. This is actually like the epitome of watching. I mean, it's like watching you grow up. Mm-hmm. You know, because you started back at Global, and before that, you literally went to work with your dad.
I did.
So what do you think about when that happens? When
you go to work with your dad?
Yeah. What was, I mean, you know, just going back to that day. Think about that.
Yeah. No. I mean, it's cool. It's cool. Like now to be able to do it all over again, and it's kind of funny that everything changes and nothing changes.
Yeah. So I mean, you started there. Well, you didn't start there, but you eventually went to college, mm-hmm. and then you got the job at Global. So tell us where you got started with that. How did you get the job, and what did you do first off?
Global. I got the job because I did a practicum at Global.
Nice.
And then I begged and begged and begged for any job I could possibly do, and I wanted to be on air, but there was no on-air jobs, and they weren't like, hey, you just graduated, we want to put you on TV. Yeah. So I did all the technical stuff, the floor directing and the cameras and the VTR and the audio stuff, and just slowly waited for someone to be sick one day so I could take their shift.
Yeah, and you did. You literally did everything, and that's back in the day when you actually there were those positions. Mm-hmm. So, but you always had it in your mind that you wanted to get on air. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What was your favorite tech op position?
You know what? There's some kind of flair about the floor directing. The big swoop you get to do when people go live. I think floor directing was my favorite.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah.
All right. So from floor directing, what was your first break for getting on air?
It was probably a Saturday. I don't remember, but it was probably a Saturday. Someone had probably called in sick, and I was like, please, give me a chance. And went and covered whatever was going on in Lethbridge that day, and I guess it was good enough, and I got to kind of switch back and forth for a while, doing on air and doing the tech stuff until eventually I got to do all on air all the time.
Yeah, always as a reporter.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, until I was anchoring, which I think happened like 3 or 4 years later.
Yeah. So tell us about the experience of being a reporter. What were some of your highlights, your lowlights, or some of the things? What are some of the things that you learned, and maybe some of the things that eventually you were able to use as you got further in your career?
Yeah, I think honestly my favorite part is just like I come back to Lethbridge now and I still know all of these people, and it's not because I lived here for so long, it's because I worked at Global. Like you got to go out every day and just randomly meet people. You never knew what your day was going to look like. You got to go tell people stories who maybe the stories wouldn't have been told, or maybe you never would have met them. I think that was my favorite part, and also being the person that got to go dig for the information and then offer it to everybody else was the best part for me. Honestly, I think the most boring part was, like for example, in Edmonton, my job was I was a morning live reporter, and sometimes there's stuff going on at 5 a.m. and sometimes there's nothing going on at 5 a.m. And the worst part was like the weather person does the weather, and the traffic person does the traffic in the studio, and then they throw live to me, and I'm like, hey, I'm out here, and it's -30. You guys are right. It's cold and it's snowing, and there's a lot of traffic going slow. Back to you. Like that's the worst part, because it's like you don't need me.
So you did do some live morning stuff, at Global Edmonton. Yeah. Just going back, it's again because I've got some history with you. I think about, here you became the right-hand person for the Premier of Alberta, and I think back of Cheryl, the kind of the mischievous Cheryl, and at some point. I mean, did you ever lose that? Because you did like to kind of throw in a wrench every once in a while, have some fun with some people. But when you're doing things with the Premier of Alberta, you sort of have to, I mean, for lack of a better way of saying it, you have to mature, get a little more serious about things.
Yeah. Like, I mean,
at what point do you decide that, or do you?
Yeah, no, I think there's lots. I think that certainly translates in a different way. Like, you know, in Lethbridge, I got to put weird things in the teleprompter and force other people to say them.
And they would say them.
I'm obviously not going to do that to the Premier of the province, hopefully. But, you know, little like quirky things, taking risks or finding fun ways. I think, you know, when you spend so much time on the road and when you know, everything's sort of like very serious and you're running from one meeting to the next and running from one press conference to the next, that sort of approach to work helped us find fun things to do and take risks and, you know, be silly once in a while. So, you know, not quite as out there as, you know, forcing our poor colleagues to say things they didn't want to say, but, you know, finding a more professional way to do that.
Well, so we'll get into the big job in a second, but what would you say was maybe like your defining story that you ever did on Global? Like that one said, you know, if I'm going to send out a tape, this is the one that I got to send. Like one that you really put your heart and soul into. Was there a story, do you think?
Yeah, there was so many stories. I mean, the ones that I really remember are the times when I just felt like I had, like, you know, you hadn't heard it on the scanner yet, or you hadn't got an alert on it yet, and someone would call the newsroom. And sometimes, you know, people called and they weren't really stories. Right. And sometimes people called and you just like, you got this feeling, or I did at least, like this instinct, like this is a real thing. And I know that it's not for sure yet, but I'm going to go and cover it. And sometimes that meant I was the only person there, and sometimes it meant that I got a better story than other people did. And I think for me that was the most rewarding, because I just felt like that was where I was supposed to be, that was something I was good at. So it's not one story in particular, it's just those moments where I was like, I know this is something people will care about, and just following that.
Yeah. Was there ever a lot of times you do stories that you feel uncomfortable about having to get a story. Did that ever happen to you, where you have to make a phone call and say, oh yeah, this is, you know, like there's a murder or someone died?
Totally.
Yeah. What was your approach to something like that?
You know, you always feel like the bad guy, right? Like, especially if something bad has just happened to someone and you know they're in the middle of grieving or dealing with it, and you're like the annoying person that they've never met before that's calling them up or showing up on their doorstep to say, did you want to talk on camera? And I think you go into those moments just assuming they're going to say no. Right. So assuming that they're going to say, like, there's way too much going on for me, you got to get out of here. But then there's the moments where someone's like, you know what, I really do, like, say it's someone who's just passed away, I really do want to tell their story, I want them to have a legacy, I want everyone else to know what is really going on here. And those are really nice moments, and those were what made me, you know, when you're like, your heart's pounding and you're dialing that poor grieving person's phone number, like, you know how good you can make them feel if you tell a good story. Right. So that's kind of what for me, I always had to think about, you know, if they do want to do it, it'll be a lovely, like, gift or a legacy or something down the road. So how long did you spend at Global? A couple of days? About 7 years.
Was it 7 years?
Yeah.
7 years. Okay, so the transition. Let's take us from Global, taking another job, and then ultimately becoming, you know, working with the government. So let's go that route. Let's go. And it didn't just happen overnight. No, I mean, I started working for the NDP in opposition. And for me, it was a good challenge. The NDP was a fourth party. It had very little insight into how the brains of reporters worked, and, you know, the little things that kind of help you get more exposure than you would have got, like, you know, what time a press release goes out, or what's written in the lead of a press release, or, you know, just calling around to reporters being like, what are you doing today? Do you want to cover what I'm doing? Like, come on, come help me out. So that was a fun challenge for me, and I went into that and we started getting more coverage, and, you know, my experience having sat on that side of the phone was really helping me in terms of, you know, what these guys were looking for and adapting to what the media was doing that day and trying to get in the mix. So that was really fun, and it gave me an opportunity to prove myself in a world I had never worked in. How did you get that job? Like, I mean, because you're a reporter, and all of a sudden, bam, you're a communications person. What did you have that got you the job?
You know what? I actually don't know. I don't know why they hired me, because I did my interview, and Brian Mason was the leader at the time, and this is so embarrassing because I studied all night. Like, I was like trying to remember everything, and I have a good memory. And so in the interview, he asked me, who is the leader of every party, and what's good about them and what's bad about them in terms of what they're doing. Wow. And I went through all of them, and then I got to the PCs who were in power at the time, and it was after Redford had stepped down, and so Hancock was the interim premier. And when I got to that, it just, like, my mind just went blank, and I'm like, I just did an interview and I don't know who the premier is. And so I walked out, I'm like, oh my God, I'm totally not getting this job. And then he apparently liked me, gave me a chance, and then, you know, the night of the election in 2015, he was like, Cheryl, do you know who the premier is now?
Wow, yeah.
I was like, indeed I do.
How good of a feeling is that, to be the person who is representing the NDP at the time, who had hardly any seats in the legislature, to going to empower. And then, you making that phone call to those media people now. How do you like me now?
That was good. It was fun. Yeah.
I mean, it's a nice shift of power for you.
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah. I mean, you got to keep it all in perspective
Sure.
because, one day, and, we're here,
Yeah.
it all switches back, right?
Yeah.
So, you end up in the opposition again. You end up, out doing a different job, and all that shifts so quickly, and 4 years goes by so quickly that I think I hope I did a good job of just trying to keep in the back of my mind that, maybe today the power shifted towards me, but one day it's definitely going to shift
Sure.
back.
You always hold
Yeah.
that in the back of your
Yeah.
mind. Yeah. So just a pretty broad general question, how was it working for the Premier? And the fact that you were there for 4 years, that probably says a lot, because no one ever lasts that long.
I know.
For what you do. And explain what it is that you did do.
So I was a communications director. Basically, I oversaw the political side of all government communications. So that's basically, everything coming out of the Premier's office, everything she says publicly, and then also all of the ministries as well. So every press secretary, communication staff working in a ministry reported up to me. So eventually, and then digital as well by the end. So eventually, I think my department was like 30-ish.
30 people in communications?
Yeah, and that's just the
Wow.
political side. There's also
Wow.
like a public service side that supports all of that work.
Wow.
Yeah. So basically my job was to make sure that we were doing kind of the outgoing. Here's what the government's working on right now. Here's what the public needs to know, and then also the incoming. We call it issues management, where people throw stuff at you or have tough questions that you need to answer, and you have to answer them.
Do you answer them for the Premier, or does the Premier say to you, "How am I going to answer this?" I mean, what's your, you must have talked with her constantly. You
Yeah.
were with her all the time.
Yeah, and it was a bit of both.
Yeah.
And then I think there was days where I had, I knew an issue really well, or I had been talking to the media quite a bit, and I would say, I think this is the direction we should go. And she has an opinion on everything. Like, it's never like, Premier, I think you should say this today. And she's like, you betcha, I'll go ahead and say that. So it was a lot of workshopping it and just testing it and talking about what the implications of saying each thing were. But, we kind of went back and forth. And I think after 4 years of doing that, you sort of build like this mind meld. Like a couple people told us, every time I talk to you, you guys say the same thing.
Oh,
How are you doing that?
yeah.
I think it just happens over time.
So obviously you get along with her.
I do.
Yeah, and what was that relationship like for you? Maybe if you can give us a sense of who Rachel Notley was or is.
No, I think she's much more personable and funny and laid back than she got to be on television or in the job of the Premier. She's a very, very funny, laid back woman. And I think, luckily for me, I got to know that really well because she kind of forced me into becoming a runner.
Yeah, well, that's right. You guys ran every day, didn't you?
Yeah, I was never a runner. Like, I hated running, and I still kind of hate running, to be honest. But we would travel. I like to work out, and we were on the road so much. I don't have a car.
Yeah.
There's no gym. So you got to start running with me. I'm like, I'll never be a runner. I can't even run 5K.
Yeah.
And then so we started running every morning, and you chat while you're running, and you get to know someone so much better. And then we started running half marathons together.
Jeez.
And we ran a lot while we were working, but we also ran all the time on the road.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we connected. We started connecting a little bit more, and then you kind of get that chance one-on-one, which rarely happens in that world, to sort of hash out the day and what's going on, and then also talk about our personal lives. So I think I was lucky to have to work for a woman I deeply respect and admire, but also get to work for someone who I will forever consider my friend.
Right. So, are you friends first and then co-workers later, or what's?
I would say
now you are. Yeah.
Now, and I would say previously, I would have always, because I respect her so much and because she was my boss, always my boss first and my friend after.
Sure. And she was at your wedding. She did your wedding.
That's right.
I still love the line because I was there. By the power invested in me, by me, Rachel Notley saying, and I pronounce you.
Yeah.
That was pretty funny.
She loves that too.
So that was pretty cool, and you had some cabinet ministers there as well. So that felt pretty good, I'll bet.
Yeah, it was nice.
Yeah,
it's
very
a
nice.
big family.
Yeah. So were you leaning to an NDP ideology before you got the job, or did you I don't even know. Maybe you don't have that ideology.
I
don't
certainly
know.
do.
You do. Okay, so because I imagine you could still do the job without having the ideology, or could you? I don't know.
I don't think you could.
No?
So there's basically the two sides of government. There's the public service, which people are political, they're apolitical, they lean to any party, and then the political side, you could maybe work there if you weren't, leaning towards one party's ideology, but I don't think you'd be happy there.
No, right.
Like that's kind of what drives the passion of that work, because it's hard work and it's long hours and you give up a lot of your life. And if you're not deeply invested in the work that you're doing and the values behind it, I just don't think you could be happy doing it.
Yeah.
But for me, I didn't know that I aligned so closely with the NDP, because as a reporter, you just never think of yourself. Right. You're like, everybody's equal. I cover everybody equally, especially when it comes to elections. And you just never think of yourself truly political. But when it came down to it and I started looking into it more and I started talking to the NDP, I realized that I do
right.
I aligned more closely with the NDP than any party. And of course now, having been so deeply embedded in it for 5 years, that's where I live politically.
Yeah. Let's talk about, a lot of people say, oh, Cheryl, you got to go to Paris, you went traveling all over the place. But your life really wasn't traveling so much as let's get to another place and hash out what we got to do in this hotel room, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
really disappointing.
Because you did get to go like Paris. You get where
we
else?
did Paris. We did China and Japan.
Oh my gosh.
And then like a bunch of like U.S. trips, of course. Like we went down to Texas and Phoenix and Washington lots.
Yeah.
So yeah, those were, they sound lovely, but there's just so much, those trips are so short and you try to slam them in between a bunch of other things. You've got travel in the middle of that as well. And so when you get there.
You gotta jog.
Yeah, you gotta jog. And so when you get there, it's basically back to back meetings. And then maybe one night you get to go out for dinner for fun.
Yeah.
And the inside of a hotel room or a boardroom in China looks just like the ones in Edmonton. So it wasn't, it was cool. It was a cool experience. Also, just to be a part of, an international mission is interesting on its own, but it wasn't really the lovely lifestyle that it is painted to be.
All right, let's get into some nitty gritty. Why did the NDP lose this election?
I don't know. I don't think we did anything wrong. I'm really, really proud of our campaign. But I think that, Alberta, it's been a tough few years in Alberta, and it's tough for a government to get a second term when the economy has been doing so poorly. So I think that's, there are a few little things, but I think that's generally what it comes down to. And when things are bad and people don't see hope in the economic future, they look for change.
Right. Which is what they were looking for when they got the NDP in the first place.
Yeah. And still looking at it now, like Rachel Notley is as popular or more popular than the current premier. And so you can't say that people turned their back on her. Like, we won most of Edmonton with the exception of one seat. And she's still, everywhere she goes, people are fangirling her and taking selfies and shaking her hand. So, the party itself is stronger than it's ever been. So, it wasn't an easy or the outcome we were looking for, but still super proud of that campaign.
What's your relationship, or what's your feelings about here in Lethbridge we've got Shannon and a new UCP guy. So and I know, having recently just talked to both of them, they both want to work for the good of Lethbridge, which I think is a great, healthy attitude to have. But at the same time, there's one side of each party there. So how is that going to work out, do you think?
Well,
how do we make that happen?
I hope that's I think everyone goes into it saying, I'm in it for the good of the place that I represent and my province and moving the province forward, and everyone has to give each other a chance, at least in the beginning. And I'm sure there will be lots of heads that butt. Like the UCP and the NDP are quite different in terms of a lot of issues in terms of ideology. So I imagine there will be some big differences. But sometimes those conversations are conversations worth having, and they get us further, even if they're not exactly the outcome that either representative wanted. So hopefully it leads to good discussions, and hopefully everyone can work together. And at this point, it's hard to say whether that will be the outcome or not. You have to just trust that people's intentions are in the right places. Okay,
so big talking points during election, pipeline carbon tax. So what happened there? Was that a problem that the carbon tax was part of it? Because that was a big, we're gonna repeal the carbon tax.
I think the carbon tax issue, I know that there is still a lot of frustration with the carbon tax. Nobody wants to pay more taxes. But the carbon tax issue, in terms of a vote deciding issue, I think it was bigger before. And now we're getting to the point where people are starting to realize that even if a province repealed the tax, it's going to be federally implemented.
It is,
and so And so it's just not as big of and it wasn't as big of a talking point even for the Conservatives as we thought it might be. I think that it adds to people's economic frustration, but I don't think it was the deciding factor in the election.
Right. And what about, is a pipeline going to get built?
I think a pipeline will be built, but it's just hard to say now. Now we're coming up on the federal election, and moving that project forward is completely in the federal government's hands. So Alberta has done all that it possibly can. We've got it through hoop after hoop after hoop, and then it got backtracked, and then went back through the hoops again. And they're supposed to finish up Indigenous consultation shortly, and hopefully we see the federal government move forward on it.
Yeah. Okay, so you're not in the party anymore.
I'm in the party.
Well, you are.
but I'm just not working.
Not working for the party. I guess that's the word.
Yeah.
Jason Kenney.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you think? He's the new leader. He's the guy, and there's lots of controversial topics about him in the past, have been. But what's he gonna be for this country or this province?
I hope that he makes decisions in the best interests of Albertans. I mean, through our campaign, no secret, we ran some pretty negative advertising talking about his history and the things that he's done, and the things that he's spent his life campaigning on. But I mean, he's newly elected as the premier. Alberta elected him, and so we have to give him a chance. And hopefully, like we always said, you can come into office with all of these ideas.
Sure.
And once you get there and you realize, first of all, what's possible, but second of all, the weight of making decisions that affect a whole province, things change a little bit, mm-hmm. and you have to shift a little bit in terms of what's in the best interest for the most number of people. So I hope that that's the direction that he governs in, and I think it's too early to say whether that will happen, but I hope that, the past and what he's campaigned on and who he's worked against is in the past.
Okay. You had the chance to go federally, like you've met Pierre. Sorry, that was the dad. I was back in my day. No, Justin Trudeau. Your thoughts about him, and will they win the next election? Or what do you think?
I think that's a tough one to answer right now, especially because I don't spend a lot of time out of Alberta, and the feeling in Alberta is much different than it is in other parts of Canada. So it's tough to tell how people are feeling outside of Alberta, but certainly here, like in every city, everywhere, there's a ton of frustration, right? Like people want to see that project built, and I think a lot of it, in terms of Alberta, but also Canada now, comes down to that pipeline, and it comes down to is this the kind of prime minister that can build and go ahead with nation building projects, or is it someone who's going to make decisions based on points for political gain?
Yeah.
And I think in Alberta that matters incredibly, but also I think that the idea of being able to get big things done matters to the rest of Canada too.
What about environmentally? How are we doing? We want to get rid of the carbon footprint. Mm-hmm. We want to be sustainable without oil and gas. But that's the reality of what we're at. Mm-hmm. What do you see in the future? I mean, so many auto businesses or dealers are looking to the electric cars. Mm-hmm. So what's in your crystal ball?
I think there's a lot of move towards renewable sources. But I think we're an oil and gas province for a long time still.
Yeah.
We're going to be relying on oil and gas for a long time still. And so although everybody needs to do their part to transition to have a lower carbon footprint, we also need to be able to build infrastructure like pipelines to continue to keep our economy going, but also continue to fuel that need for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of both. And I think having an environmental plan as well as moving the pipeline forward is part of that. You got to do both at the same time, and you can't pick one or the other.
Yeah. I know, you're from Lethbridge, and of course you lived in Edmonton and you worked in Edmonton. What we in Southern Alberta often will get the feeling that no one remembers that Lethbridge is here. Hello, hi, because there's so many members mm-hmm. of the government that live in Edmonton. Mm-hmm. What do you think that well, to me it seemed like the NDP remembered that we were here mm-hmm. during that time. Do you think that will continue? That that will be represented well enough in Lethbridge?
We'll see, I guess. I don't know how the new government will look at that stuff. But I think that it's really hard to ignore Shannon Phillips.
In fact, she's here now.
If you know Shannon, you know that it's really hard to ignore her, and she will do a really good job. I don't know the other representative personally, so I can't speak to that. But I know Shannon's very hard to ignore, and she's very persistent, and so I think she'll do a really good job of making sure that Lethbridge is not forgotten.
Good. Yeah. Okay, so let's just finish off with. If you can summarize your 5 years, was it 5 years with Rachel? My 5 years with Rachel in the NDP government was?
So eye-opening. Really
Yeah.
though, it was like I don't think there will ever be a time in my life where I learned more than I did, especially in the 4 years in government. Like, you get in there, nobody tells you how to do your job. The old political staff is gone, and you're just like, for me, I had this whole wing that was a communications wing, and I was just sitting in it by myself, and I'm like, I don't even know where to start. And you learn things about yourself, and you learn things about working with other people, and you learn so much about government and how it works. So I'll never learn as much as I did there, and I learned so many skills and perspectives that I can take forward into other jobs. So there was definitely some days, like really hard days, where I'm like, what am I doing here? But in the end, like, the good times and the reward and the working with a province that I care so much about outweighs all of that so much.
But you worked a lot of hard, long days, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
So I mean, it came to the point where you said, I love the time, but I need to move on, right? Yeah, and that was a conscious decision on your part. I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, basically in these jobs, especially the higher level jobs where you're giving up your whole life. Like, I don't think I ever worked a day less than 10 hours.
Wow.
Most of them were, over 12, and every weekend and every Christmas except for one. And when you do all of that, you give up everything else in your life. And at a certain point, you just have to say, it's time for me to, I would like to stay married to my lovely, patient, forgiving husband.
What's his name?
And it's time for us to, he's also put a lot on hold while he, patiently watches me do this. And so it's time for us to go do something together and to move on to a new chapter.
Okay. And that chapter is, where are you going and how did you get this job?
Yeah, we're moving to Kyrgyzstan.
I love Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah.
It's outside of Weyburn, I think, right?
Yeah.
Way outside.
So normally when I say that to people, they're like, where in the world is that? Yeah. So it's west of northern China, and I'm going with an organization based out of the US that basically works with countries all over the world to help them develop democracies and build more open and transparent governments and elections.
Wow, holy cow.
Specifically, I'll be working to help in the long term get more women elected, and in the same term or shorter term help to change or shift public perception about women in politics a little bit.
So Kyrgyzstan right now is what kind of government? Because I don't.
It's a democracy.
It is a democracy,
yeah.
as is the whole. They were part of the Soviet Union, and so are they an independent country right now? Okay.
Yeah, they are a democracy, developing democracy. Like so many, they still have some issues to deal with, including representation of women in parliament. So, and working on more, building a parliament or building legislation that actually does what people are looking for from their government, and figuring out how to do that and how to implement it and how to move forward with it. So
they're a democracy. Is it a president? Is it a president or a prime minister? What kind of what hierarchy do they have?
Yeah, so they have a head of state, and they have a democratically elected parliament, and they just need to, just like any countries all over the world, they have to have their elections monitored to make sure they go well, but also to give the public confidence in what's going on, and then start doing or keep doing some more stuff that what really makes people's life better in that country.
Do they have different political parties, like a liberal, conservative, that sort of thing? What do they have? Do
you know what? So much of this I don't know the details of yet. So I've read quite a bit of it, but Kyrgyzstan is. It's Russian speaking, and they have their own local dialect as well. And so I've Googled pretty much everything I can, but there's not a ton in English. So I'm just I'm going to learn a lot of it when I get there, especially the intricacies of the political system. But it'll be a fun new adventure, and I'm sure I'll learn tons.
What would we know about Kyrgyzstan? What's their main thing? Are they farming? Are they?
So they're kind of like this, from what I can tell and what I've heard, they're kind of like this budding tourist destination.
Oh, really? Wow.
So it's a country that's largely made up of mountains, and if you Google it, it's just it's beautiful mountains. It's like rivers and huge. It's a nomadic, a traditionally nomadic population, and so people on horseback everywhere, and just it's really beautiful looking.
And have you learned Russian?
I am trying to learn Russian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Дуже добре, лише в Russian.
No, that's very good.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So it'll be. I think from what we've heard, a lot of people speak English there, but I just think it'd be fun to learn Russian. So.
Wow. And that's you've got an 18-month contract right now?
Yeah, it's kind of an open-ended contract, but we think we'll give it a shot for 18 months and see what happens from there.
And then do you get to travel around a little bit in that area?
Yeah,
as well?
hopefully. We're planning to get a little Russian, Soviet 4x4 car, and then we're just going to drive through the mountains. And some of the travel is really easy because Kyrgyzstan doesn't have, you don't need a visa if you're Canadian.
Really?
And also the
Okay.
country to the north, Kazakhstan, you don't need a visa if you're Canadian. So do a little bit of traveling, and a bunch of stuff is much closer to there than it is to here.
that's
So
good.
hopefully we'll see some things.
And is there political unrest at all, or is it not bad?
I think what we've been told is it's not bad, that it's
Yeah.
pretty, safe. You can walk the streets at night, you can be alone. There's families in the street with little kids till midnight. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds pretty good.
Wow. And when do you get started on that? That's
So
pretty quick.
Yeah, I think we'll leave around June 7th.
Nice.
Yeah.
And do you have to get shots?
You know what? Both Aaron and
Google
I have
that.
I've traveled so much. I think we have everything, but like if you hadn't traveled, you'd need some vaccinations to go there.
Did you need a work visa for that?
Yeah, yeah.
And you've applied and gotten it? Is that the
Yeah, they'll figure that out for me.
Is that the Kyrgyzstan government that got you this, or is it
Nope.
it's an American company that says we want you to go in here, and that's how
Yeah.
that works? Okay.
Yeah, so I did a little stint with them, like a 2-week contract in October. I went to Armenia, and they were in the middle of, they call it the Velvet Revolution, a complete shift of power in Armenia. So I got to go be a part of that for
Wow.
a quick 2-week stint, and then I liked them and they liked me, and
Oh, good.
yeah.
So, when Cheryl was going to bring your kid to work day, did you ever think that this is where you'd be? Any of that in your mind?
You know what? I think like so many people who want to work in journalism, I think that they believe that they'll work in journalism forever.
Yeah.
Like you get into it not because you're going to work great hours or get paid great, because we know that doesn't happen. You get into it because you really like passionately believe in it. And I like even the ones that worked in media that came to work for me in politics. It's a tough decision to leave it because that's how you identified yourself. So like no, I thought I would be in journalism forever.
Yeah.
But there's so many parallels. Between journalism, between politics, between media and communications work, that it's been a rewarding transition. Like I don't feel like I've lost all of that.
Nice. I have to ask if Premier Notley ever met or has any opinions on that guy that runs is the president of that state, the United States. That guy.
I'm sure she does have strong opinions.
Have they ever met?
They
she
haven't
ever-
met, no.
No. Does she have strong opinions about him
Yeah.
and his
Yeah, she
style?
does. Well, I mean, she's a New Democrat, right? So
Right, yeah.
I don't think it's surprising that she hoped
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton would win.
Yeah.
And she was disappointed when she didn't.
And what about your opinions of Donald Trump right now?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like I would have really liked to see a woman be elected to the highest office in the United States. I would have liked to see them take that step forward, and I think he's done a lot of, unfortunately, that populist kind of politics that people like to hear and they like to talk about on social media, but in the end it doesn't benefit a lot of people and it hurts a lot more.
Yeah. Just the man himself. I mean, for me anyway, he's just not presidential in my mind. Do you find that as well?
Yeah, I don't think that you can hold one of the strongest offices in the world and govern by 140 characters at a time. Like I don't think that's a healthy way for anyone to run a country, especially a country that is so powerful.
Okay, and final thoughts about kids, who are getting taken to work day. What sort of things would you like to impart with them? If they're trying to follow a career like you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you just have to I think I have been successful mostly because I found things I'm really happy to be doing. Like I said, I never want to go to a job where I don't feel like at the end of the day I've contributed something, even if it's small, to the community that I live in. And also, I never wanted a job that wasn't cool enough that they made TV shows about. So I don't know. If you do something you really love, I think that you'll keep moving up successively, and I think you'll keep, the passion is what takes you forward. So whether that's journalism or something else, it's just loving what you do.
Sugar beets.
Sugar beets. It could totally be sugar beets.
Sure, why not? Cheryl, thank you so much,
Yeah.
and best of luck.
Thank you.
In where you're going.